exactly the opposite of the sermon today. But just as I reflect on that, you know, I had a little bit of, the wedding was in Aaron's home church in Michigan. We'll just leave it there. Okay, so she and Jordan had worked with the local pastor there, that she had grown up in that church, and he knew her well, and we hadn't communicated so well. You know, I just presumed, like for Joshua, our older son, is that dad would you know, marry them and do things and so on. Only the pastor was presuming, since it was his church, that I would be the servant to him. And all of a sudden it became clear. And I said, you know, he was saying, well, you're the guest. And I says, well, whatever that it is, you know, I have my degree, and it's a JD, Jordan's dad. Isn't that clever?
Yeah, very good.
That you know, you got to admire somebody's brain power. You got a JD, Jordan's dad. Yeah. God doesn't appreciate brilliance. So that was the first thing, and would have never solved that except Aaron intervened. And she said, Dad, you let me take care of it. And she must have read the riot act, because the pastor backed down, and that was it. So that's the first thing, and I've shared with you way more than you need to know about that. But the second thing is I'd wanted so badly then for my son's wedding, as well as the background. You know, it's a little bit of preacher, whatever. You know, boy, you've seen a wedding sermon. You're going to see one. And what I had done in the past is I borrowed from my demon work at Fuller. Is there one of the classes, the guest preacher, and he said, you know, on a wedding day, most couples are so nervous they don't remember anything you preach. So in humility, what I do is I try and come up with a little object lesson I give to them, and they keep that. And then it'll bring back, well, what does that object lesson have to do with the sermon? Like he would give them a camera. You remember the old days, the disposable camera? He says that he'd give them a disposable camera and they would take it with them. Well, what does that have to? Well, it's that God's taking pictures of you. And you make sure always you're at your best for each other. So the pictures are not at your worst, but at your best. So that was one little illustration of that. Our older son, Joshua, got married, and he and his wife, Gian, they had a teasing time of getting lost. So there, you know, it'd be just a simple little gift. But for them, in the old days, I don't know if you remember the Garmin's. Now it's on it's part of the car, right? You just say where you want to go. Well, this Garmin was a little gift that we got to them, and the teaching was, as we gave it to them, is you know, when you get lost in life, God is your Garmin. That's it. You know, that He'll teach you how to get back on the right track. Well, for Jordan's wedding, a friend who humbles me, whether I like it or not, Chuck, he says he wasn't at the wedding, but Don and Carol, I says it was the worst, Chuck, it was the worst sermon that ever could have been delivered for my son's wedding. He says, well, what did you preach? I said, well, I preached on everything. The whole Bible? I says, close. And Joshua, our son, was so kind. You know, what do you need for an illustration? One thing, I needed a table. You get the idea? So Joshua was kind. He helped me move the table. He was not embarrassed to own up that was his dad. I don't know that guy. I never saw him before, you know. But that was the worst sermon, and I'm sharing that with you. Just, you know, that what it was I guess I had some pride in that, you know, and I was thinking of me rather than Jordan. I didn't think of it at the time, but that's how it is. And so as a preacher too, it's all about God and your people, never about you. And God has a way of humbling you and lifting you up so that you'll keep learning that lesson. It's Him that blesses. And if you're not with Him, then He has a word of correction. And Amos has that same thought in mind for God's people of his century. You see, what was happening was the people were living and they were close to other nations, and they were beginning to envy those other nations, the way that they would worship and their gods, and so they're fancy, and so on. And so they decided that they would worship and borrow some of their customs. One of the ways is they worshiped at Bethel and Dan rather than at Jerusalem. And that was God's place that he had. Now you might say, well, what's the difference? Washington, Springfield, Madison, every city, has its good things, its bad things. You like Chicago, somebody else likes Springfield. No big deal. It wasn't about Bethel and Dan. It was about the people and the way they were living. Justice and righteousness were being replaced by all sorts of frivolity and heathen ways, okay, and the temple prostitutes and things like that. And Amos saw that, and here the people were borrowing, and yet they were thinking God would still be pleased with their worship. And Amos was saying to them, your sacrifices and everything stink. I want nothing to do with them. And in our culture, we struggle in many of the same ways. No matter what party you identify with, Republican or Democrat or somewhere in between, independent or another party, this last Tuesday we had an election, and I remember 4 years ago we had an election, and boy, that sure solved things, didn't it? 4 years, that we knew that the people had spoken, and we all accepted that, and we got behind our government. Well, I'd like to think that, right? Wouldn't you? And so we have another election, and that'll solve things, won't it? Until you can't ignore it anymore. The same problems are coming. Only who do we blame now? The old guy's gone. The liars are still lying. No, it's only the Republicans or the Democrats that lie. The other party always tells the truth, don't they? Boy, couldn't I be a good politician? And so with that too, it's not about any one name. It's about the way we treat one another. And the peace and so on is not there. I'm reminded of this, it's so easy for us to revert to war and to pride. My side is right. We're going to kill the rest of you. Get rid of you. We don't need you. I tell you that war solves the problem for one generation. But then the children of that generation get bigger, and they remember, and they come back. If you think that's just my thought, you haven't seen The Godfather. When the little boy, Vito, the mother begs for Vito's life, and the warlord, he says, no, he says, can't do that. He says, that child, he's harmless right now, and he's not too smart. He's going to grow older, and he's going to kill me. And that's what happens. That's the way life is, right? War solves things for that generation, but until there's peace, it comes back. And the beautiful thing is for us, not just justice and righteousness, but we have forgiveness. We have God's love. And of all the different possibilities, I tell you this, I've never seen war as a lasting solution to anything. But God's peace is. It's forever. We just have to claim it and share it with one another. There are two stories that I want to share with you. One story is a negative one. 1986, that's a few years back, but 1986 in the Black Sea, I believe that's part of Russia. So the two Russian ships crashed, They're in the Black Sea and they crash. And people are thrown into the icy water and hundreds lose their lives. That's a tragedy in and of itself. As the government did research, what they found was the two captains. The real tragedy was two captains kind of played chicken with each other. They saw that they were on a collision course, but one expected the other one to turn. And the other one expected the other one to turn. Now, whether they knew each other or just, bad things, it was stubbornness. Neither one would give in. And so they crashed. That's the first story. The second story is a story about 100 years ago. It's the story of Booker T. Washington. Booker Taliaferro Washington. Now, I know another Booker T. Booker T. and the MGs. Okay? Same middle name. Booker Taliaferro Jones. And out of Memphis. And gifted organist, musician. Only in rock and roll. And obviously he was named after Booker T. And Booker T. Washington. There's a story of one day. He was born into slavery, 1856 or in the 1850s. He and his mother would pray every night that God would deliver them from slavery. And God did. And educated Booker T. in church Christian schools so that he had a love for God. And in Tuskegee, I believe that's in Alabama, he founded a school for black children. And the story goes, one day, he was walking down the streets in a wealthy area of Tuskegee, and he met up with a white woman. She came out of her house, and she had seen him coming down the street, and she presumed that he was one of the workers that her husband had hired. And so she said, if you want to do some things, that there's some wood that needs to be chopped in the back of the house. Could you chop that wood? She presumed that he was one of the hired men. And Booker T. did it. He took off his coat, chopped the wood. He asked, where would you like this wood? Well, over there. So he stacked it nicely and so on. And she paid him a few dollars, and he went on his way. And it was after that, a little girl had seen this whole thing. And so she told the wealthy lady, she says, do you know who chopped the wood for you? And, well, no, I think it was one of the men that my husband hired. No, that's Booker T. Washington, the new principal of the school. And the woman, the next time she saw Booker T., she says, I found out who you are. She says, and I'm embarrassed that I presumed what is not right. And so she says, would you please forgive me? And Booker T., he says, oh, no. He says, you gave me a privilege. I enjoy doing some manual things every now and again. I hadn't done them. So this gave me good exercise. Thank you. That lady, they smiled and so on. That lady gave a gift to the school, and she encouraged all of her friends to do the same. Booker T. never wanted for money for the school. It wasn't for the money. They became partners. Now I think about that in our culture today. The media would kill that woman, wouldn't they? They would roast her. I guess I should say that word. They would roast her. But that's a story of humility on both parts. One is, that's the way life is. I'm not so above menial work, and I'm not so above asking people to forgive me when I make a mistake. Versus the stubbornness. You might be right, but you're dead right if you continue in the course of where we're going. And that's where justice and righteousness comes in for Amos. It's our life. It's our being true to our relationship to God. And our relationship to God is especially true in Jesus, isn't it? He came and he could have, burned everybody up, and that's an option. Remember the flood, okay? But God chose the option in Jesus, and that's his lasting one, the option of forgiveness. And as we think about it in our lives, every now and again, the pride comes through, and that is usually one of destruction. And it always comes back, doesn't it? Where the devil, wants us to lift our noses higher than they should be. But when we come to the Lord and we rest in his forgiveness and his love, then he blesses not only us, but he blesses all others that come into our presence. The Lord so be with each one of us in that spirit, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And we have our prayer time.